In the gleaming halls of the city's most prestigious hospital, where the air smelled of antiseptic and ambition, a scandal unfolded that would ripple through the elite circles of wealth and power. At the center of it all was Richard Langley, a self-made millionaire whose charm and ruthless business acumen had built an empire in real estate. His name was synonymous with opulence, his face a fixture in glossy magazines, and his penthouse parties the stuff of legend. But beneath the polished veneer of his public persona lay a darkness that would unravel his carefully constructed world. His wife, Emily, was 7 months pregnant, her glow dimmed by the strain of their increasingly volatile marriage. What happened in that hospital room would set off a chain of events that no one, not Richard, not Emily, nor the city's high society, could have anticipated. It was a crisp autumn evening when Emily was rushed to St. Augustine's Medical Center. She'd been feeling sharp pains all day, a nagging worry that something was wrong with the baby. Richard, ever the image-conscious tycoon, insisted on accompanying her, not out of genuine concern but to maintain the facade of a devoted husband. The hospital staff, accustomed to catering to the elite, ushered them into a private suite with plush furnishings and a view of the city skyline. Emily, pale and clutching her swollen belly, tried to focus on the doctor's instructions, but her nerves were frayed. Richard, meanwhile, paced the room, his phone buzzing incessantly with business calls. To him, this was an inconvenience, a disruption to his meticulously planned schedule. The doctor, a seasoned obstetrician named Drive Patel, arrived to examine Emily. Her vitals were stable, but the pain suggested preterm labor, a serious concern at this stage. Dr. Patel recommended immediate monitoring and a possible course of medication to delay labor. Emily nodded, her hands trembling as she gripped the hospital bed's railing. Richard, however, was barely listening. His attention was on a text from his latest mistress, a model half his age who was waiting for him at a downtown hotel. The message was provocative, a reminder of the thrill he craved outside his marriage. When Dr. Patel asked if he had any questions, Richard snapped, "Just fix it and get her out of here. I have meetings tomorrow." Emily's eyes welled up, but she said nothing. She was used to Richard's callousness, his dismissive tone when he spoke to her in private. In public, he played the doting husband, but behind closed doors, he was cold, controlling, and increasingly cruel. The hospital room, with its sterile walls and soft beeping monitors, felt like a pressure cooker. Dr. Patel, sensing the tension, excused herself to prepare the necessary paperwork, leaving the couple alone. That's when it happened. Emily, her voice barely above a whisper, asked Richard to stay with her for the night. "I'm scared," she admitted, her vulnerability raw. "I need you here." Richard's face twisted with irritation. He'd already mentally checked out, his thoughts on the hotel suite and the escape it promised. "Don't be dramatic," he sneered. "You're fine. The doctors will handle it." Emily's plea grew more desperate. "Please, Richard. This is our baby. I can't do this alone." Her words, laced with fear and love for their unborn child, only fueled his anger. He hated being tethered, hated the way her pregnancy had shifted the spotlight away from him. Without warning, Richard's hand shot out, striking Emily across the face. The slap echoed in the quiet room, a sharp, ugly sound that seemed to freeze time. Emily gasped, her hand flying to her cheek, tears spilling over as she stared at him in disbelief. The pain was less shocking than the betrayal. Her husband, the father of her child, had struck her in her most vulnerable moment. Richard's eyes flickered with something, regret, perhaps, or fear of being seen, but it was quickly replaced by defiance. "Don't push me," he hissed, as if she were the one at fault. Unbeknownst to Richard, the incident wasn't as private as he thought. A nurse, stationed just outside the door, had heard the slap and peeked through the small window in time to see Emily's stunned expression. The nurse, a young woman named Clara with a keen sense of justice, didn't hesitate. She reported the incident to the hospital's security team, who alerted the administration. By the time Richard left the room, barking orders at his assistant over the phone. The wheels of consequence were already turning. Emily's father, Charles Whittaker, was no ordinary man. As the CEO of Whittaker Industries, a conglomerate with interests in tech, manufacturing, and finance, he wielded influence that dwarfed even Richard's wealth. Charles had never liked his son-in-law, sensing the arrogance and entitlement beneath his polished exterior. When Emily called him from the hospital, her voice shaking as she recounted what had happened, Charles's blood ran cold. He was on a plane within the hour, flying from his headquarters in Chicago to be by his daughter's side. By the time he arrived, Emily was stable, the baby safe for now, but the mark on her cheek was still visible, a faint red imprint that told a story of its own. Charles didn't confront Richard immediately. He was a strategist, a man who played the long game. He sat with Emily, holding her hand as she cried, promising her that no one would ever hurt her again. Behind his calm exterior, a plan was forming. Richard's empire, built on leveraged deals and aggressive acquisitions, was not as untouchable as he believed. Charles had the resources, the connections, and the will to dismantle it piece by piece. But first, he ensured Emily's safety. He moved her to a private facility, away from Richard's reach, and hired a team of lawyers to prepare for what was to come. The legal battle began quietly but gained momentum like a gathering storm. Charles's legal team filed a domestic violence complaint, using the hospital's security footage and Clara's testimony as evidence. The footage was damning: Richard's raised hand, the moment of impact, and Emily's recoil. The case made headlines, not just because of the assault but because of who was involved. Richard Langley, the golden boy of real estate, was now a pariah, his reputation crumbling with every news cycle. His investors, spooked by the scandal, began pulling out of his projects. Partners distanced themselves, and his board of directors whispered about replacing him. But Charles wasn't content with public humiliation. He wanted justice, not just for Emily but for the principal of it. His team dug into Richard's business dealings, uncovering a web of questionable practices, shady loans, tax evasion, and contracts signed under dubious circumstances. Whittaker Industries, with its vast legal resources, filed a series of lawsuits against Richard's company, alleging fraud and breach of contract in deals where their interests overlapped. Each lawsuit was meticulously crafted, designed to drain Richard's resources and expose his vulnerabilities. Charles's connections in the financial world ensured that banks tightened their credit lines to Richard's firm, while regulators began scrutinizing his transactions. Richard, blindsided by the ferocity of the attack, scrambled to save his empire. He hired the best lawyers money could buy, but they were no match for Charles's team, led by a ruthless attorney known for dismantling corporate giants. In court, Richard's charm was useless. The judge, a no-nonsense woman with a reputation for fairness, was unmoved by his attempts to paint himself as a victim of circumstance. Emily's testimony, delivered via video to protect her health, was heart-wrenching. She spoke of Richard's controlling nature, his infidelity, and the slap that had shattered her trust. The courtroom was silent as she described her fear for her unborn child, her voice steady despite the tears. The turning point came when Charles took the stand. His presence was commanding, his words measured but devastating. He recounted Emily's childhood, her kindness, her strength, and how he'd watched her wilt under Richard's cruelty. He spoke of the hospital incident not as an isolated event but as the culmination of a pattern of abuse. Then, in a move that stunned the courtroom, he revealed documents showing that Richard had tried to coerce Emily into signing a prenuptial agreement that would have left her with nothing in the event of a divorce. The agreement, never finalized, was a window into Richard's calculating mind. As the trial progressed, Richard's company began to implode. Key executives resigned, projects stalled, and his stock plummeted. Charles's lawsuits had exposed weaknesses in Richard's financial structure, and the market did the rest. By the time the judge delivered her ruling, a restraining order, hefty fines, and a mandate for Richard to attend anger management, his empire was a shadow of its former self. The final blow came when a major creditor called in a loan Richard couldn't repay, forcing him into bankruptcy. Emily, now safe and under her father's protection, gave birth to a healthy daughter. She named her Grace, a symbol of the resilience she'd found in the aftermath of betrayal. Charles, true to his promise, ensured that Emily and Grace wanted for nothing. Richard, meanwhile, faded into obscurity, his name a cautionary tale in the circles he once dominated. The hospital room where it all began was just a memory, but its echoes had reshaped lives and toppled an empire. The courtroom buzzed with a tense hush as the judge's gavel struck, signaling the start of what would become one of the most sensational trials in the city's history. Alexander Hargrove, the self-made millionaire whose tech empire had once been the envy of Silicon Valley, sat rigidly at the defendant's table. His tailored suit, once a symbol of unassailable power, now hung on him like a ill-fitting shroud. Across the aisle, Elena Hargrove, his estranged wife, 8 months pregnant and radiating a quiet fury, clutched her father's hand. Victor Langston, the iron-fisted CEO of Langston Industries, a conglomerate that dwarfed Hargrove's company in scope and influence, stared daggers at the man who had dared to harm his daughter. The incident at the hospital had been the spark. It was supposed to be a routine checkup, but tensions had boiled over. Alexander, stressed from a failing merger and paranoid about Elena's fidelity, had accused her of faking complications to manipulate him. In a fit of rage, he'd slapped her across the face right there in the waiting room, sending her stumbling into a chair. Witnesses gasped, security rushed in. Elena, tears streaming but voice steady, had called her father immediately. That slap wasn't just an assault, it was the unraveling of Alexander's carefully constructed world. Now, in part 2 of this saga, the real destruction began. Victor Langston hadn't built his empire by playing fair, he played to win, and this was personal. As the trial opened, Elena's lawyer, a shark named Rebecca Klein, handpicked by Victor, laid out the charges: domestic assault, emotional distress, and a civil suit for damages that could bankrupt Alexander. But Victor's plan went deeper. He'd already mobilized his resources to dismantle Hargrove Tech from the inside out. Alexander's defense attorney, a slick operator named Marcus Hale, tried to paint the slap as a momentary lapse, exacerbated by Elena's provocations. He paraded character witnesses, business partners who lauded Alexander's innovation, employees who swore by his leadership. But Rebecca dismantled them one by one. Innovation doesn't excuse violence, she thundered, projecting hospital security footage on the courtroom screen. The grainy video showed Alexander's hand connecting with Elena's cheek, her head snapping back, her hand instinctively protecting her swollen belly. The jury, 7 women and 5 men, shifted uncomfortably, murmurs rippling through the room. Elena's testimony was the turning point. She took the stand, her voice trembling at first but growing stronger. "I loved him once," she said, locking eyes with Alexander. "But that day, in the hospital, he didn't see me as his wife or the mother of his child. He saw me as an obstacle." She described the years of subtle control, the isolation from friends, the monitoring of her phone, the outbursts that left her walking on eggshells. "The slap was the culmination," she said, "of a marriage built on fear." As she spoke, Victor sat stone-faced, but his knuckles whitened on the armrest. He'd promised Elena justice, and he meant every word. Behind the scenes, Victor's machinations were in full swing. Langston Industries held significant leverage in the tech sector: patents, supply chains, investor networks. Weeks before the trial, Victor had quietly reached out to Hargrove Tech's key investors, whispering about Alexander's instability. "A man who hits his pregnant wife can't be trusted with billions," he'd say over confidential lunches. One by one, they pulled out. Stock prices plummeted. Then came the audits. Victor's team uncovered financial irregularities. Nothing outright illegal at first, but enough to trigger SEC investigations. Alexander's CFO, a loyalist, flipped under pressure, revealing off-the-books deals that skirted tax laws. In court, Rebecca introduced evidence of these financial misdeeds, tying them to Alexander's character. This isn't just about a slap, she argued. It's about a pattern of abuse and deceit that extends from his home to his boardroom. Alexander protested, claiming it was a smear campaign orchestrated by Victor. He's using his power to crush me, he shouted during cross-examination, his composure cracking. The judge admonished him, but the damage was done. The jury saw a desperate man, not a victim. As the trial dragged into its second week, Elena went into early labor. The courtroom adjourned amid chaos, reporters swarming the exits. At the hospital, the same one where the slap occurred, Elena gave birth to a healthy baby girl, whom she named Sophia, after her late mother. Victor was there, holding his granddaughter for the first time, his steely facade softening. "She'll never know a world like the one you endured," he whispered to Elena. Alexander, barred by a restraining order, paced in his lawyer's office, furious and isolated. Back in court, the birth added fuel to the fire. Rebecca argued that Alexander's actions had endangered the child, introducing medical reports showing Elena's stress-induced complications. The jury deliberated for only 3 hours before returning a guilty verdict on the assault charge. Civil damages awarded, $50 million, to be paid personally by Alexander. But that was just the beginning. Victor's coup de grace came in the corporate arena. With Hargrove Tech's stock in freefall, Langston Industries launched a hostile takeover. Victor's board approved the bid unanimously, acquiring the company for pennies on the dollar. Alexander fought it in emergency hearings, but his legal team was overwhelmed. Key executives defected, lured by Victor's offers. Patents that Alexander had built his fortune on were reassigned under Langston's umbrella. By the trial's end, Hargrove Tech was no more, absorbed, rebranded, erased. Alexander emerged from the courthouse a broken man. Paparazzi hounded him, flashing cameras capturing his hollow eyes. His mansion was seized to cover debts, his luxury cars auctioned off. He filed for bankruptcy, but even that couldn't shield him from Victor's reach. Whispers in elite circles ensured no one would hire him. "He's toxic," they'd say. Alexander retreated to a modest apartment on the city's outskirts, surviving on odd consulting gigs, haunted by regret. Elena, meanwhile, thrived. With the settlement, she started a foundation for domestic violence survivors, channeling her pain into purpose. Sophia grew up surrounded by love, her grandfather's stories of resilience shaping her worldview. Victor, ever the strategist, mentored Elena in business, grooming her to one day take over Langston Industries. Family first, he'd say, a mantra born from loss and vengeance. Years later, at a gala honoring Elena's work, Alexander appeared uninvited, disheveled but determined. He approached her table, eyes pleading. "Elena, I'm sorry. For everything." She looked at him, not with anger, but pity. "Apologies don't rebuild lives, Alex. But maybe you can start by rebuilding yours." Victor, watching from afar, nodded subtly. His destruction was complete, not just of a company, but of the man who had dared to break his daughter's spirit. In the end, the slap that echoed through the hospital corridors had toppled an empire. Victor Langston's revenge wasn't swift, it was surgical, leaving Alexander to contemplate the ruins. Elena emerged stronger, her father's love a shield and sword. And little Sophia. She represented hope, a new beginning from the ashes of betrayal. The city moved on, but the lesson lingered. Power unchecked invites its own downfall, especially when it crosses the wrong family. Word count 1028.